Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive 3D initiative of UPSC with Sarab Kaushik. This episode provides an in-depth analysis of the 14 current affairs topics from June 25, 2026.
Yeah, we have a really packed agenda today.
We do, we really do. So I'm just going to give you a quick rapid-fire overview of our index so you know exactly where this deep dive is headed.
Right.
We are proceeding serially through everything. We're starting with the MEA's passport clarification, then we'll hit the NewsClick case, Chinese EV tech in India, the tightened FCRA rules, the return of Iranian oil, and why grid India is turning to gas-based power.
And then we're getting into the agricultural stress from the heat.
Right, exactly. The agricultural stress, the PM's 52nd PRAGATI meeting, the BRICS space and coal initiatives, the UK trade visit, the US trade talks, the NCORD Narcotics review, and finally the NMCG urban river plans.
That's a massive stack of information.
It's a staggering agenda. But look, I know this is a lot, so I want you, the listener, to know that I am your guide today. We are going to extract the absolute, the most crucial aha moments without the info overload.
Absolutely.
So to start, I want you to imagine a scenario. Imagine taking out your passport, your Aadhaar card, and your voter ID, and you just lay them all out on a table.
Okay.
These are the documents that define your existence in the system, right? Now imagine realizing that in a strict court of law, not a single one of those documents actually proves you are an Indian citizen.
Yeah, it's wild to think about.
It is. And that is the exact realization that swept the nation on June 24th, which was the 59th anniversary of the Passports Act. A Ministry of External Affairs official clarified that an Indian passport is merely a travel document. It's not legal proof of citizenship.
Right, and what's fascinating here is how much immediate, widespread bewilderment that caused. I mean, most of us operate under this assumption that if the government issues you a passport, a document that literally says Republic of India right on the front, that is the ultimate ironclad certificate of your belonging to the state.
Exactly. I mean, if my passport, my Aadhaar, and my voter ID don't prove I'm a citizen, what does? It feels like having the keys to a house, but, no deed.
It's a great analogy, but the foundational legal architecture of how India actually defines citizenship, it operates on a completely different plane. To understand this, we have to look past the passport itself and examine the Citizenship Act of 1955.
Okay, so wait, are we saying the state issues travel documents to non-citizens?
Oh, no, not at all. The government issues a passport specifically because it has conducted a standard set of verifications. It has satisfied itself that you are a citizen.
Right.
As former diplomat Nirupama Rao pointed out in our sources, your passport is incredibly powerful evidence of your citizenship in ordinary daily life. It gets you through airport security. It opens bank accounts.
But you need it for everything.
You do. But there is a massive legal distinction between evidence of a process and conclusive proof of a status in a strict legal dispute.
Okay, let me see if I'm grasping the mechanism here. Are you saying the passport proves I passed a background check on, a specific Tuesday in 2021, but it doesn't prove the underlying biological and historical facts of my lineage?
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Yes, citizenship in India is an inherent status. It's derived from specific conditions of birth, not just a single piece of paper.
Wow.
And the reason this is so incredibly complex is that those conditions of birth have been drastically altered by Parliament over the decades.
Right, the laws keep changing.
Exactly. So when the Constitution was adopted and then later codified in the 1955 Act, India largely followed just soli. That's a Latin term meaning right of the soil.
So birth on Indian soil.
Right. If you were born on Indian territory before July 1st, 1987, you were a citizen. Period. It literally didn't matter where your parents were from.
Birthplace equals citizenship. That's a very clear geographical boundary. But, obviously that didn't last, especially considering the demographic anxieties we see today.
No, it didn't last at all. As concerns over illegal immigration began to mount, particularly in the border states, the legal philosophy shifted. It moved from jus acoi to a conditional form of jus sanguinis, which is right of blood.
Ah, okay.
So for anyone born between July 1987 and December 2004, simply being born on Indian soil was no longer enough. You had to prove that at least one of your parents was an Indian citizen at the time of your birth.
And then I'm guessing they tightened it again, required both parents.
Precisely. If you were born after December 3, 2004, you must be born in India. And either both of your parents must be Indian citizens, or one must be a citizen and the other absolutely cannot be an illegal immigrant.
So when a legal dispute over citizenship reaches, say, a foreigners tribunal, The magistrate isn't looking for a passport. They're demanding proof of that deeply specific lineage.
Yes.
They need a birth certificate coupled with ancestral documentation, or, like in the case of Osama, a listing in the National Register of Citizens, or legacy data proving long-term historical residence. The passport is it's a byproduct of that status.
Exactly. It's not the anchor. And the timing of this MEA clarification, that's what makes it so combustible right now.
Right.
Currently, the Election Commission is conducting a special intensive revision, or SIR, of electoral rolls in states like Bihar and Punjab. And at the exact same time, you have this newly constituted high-level committee on demographic changes analyzing population data.
I think it's vital we pause here and set out our parameters for you, the listener, because this legal definition intersects with deep, highly charged demographic anxieties and political rhetoric regarding the NRC and voter rolls. Our goal today is strictly to map the legal architecture the courts and the ministries are using. We are stepping entirely away from the political debates surrounding these policies. We are just looking at how the machinery of the state actually functions.
And looking at that machinery, the Supreme Court recently issued a really critical judgment on May 27th regarding the Election Commission's voter roll revisions.
What did they decide?
The court upheld the intensive revision process, but they drew a very sharp line in the sand regarding authority. They ruled that while the Election Commission has the power to delete a name from a voter roll if a person lacks proper documentation, the EC absolutely cannot adjudicate citizenship.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Only a designated authority under the Citizenship Act can formally declare someone a non-citizen.
Okay, so losing your right to vote in a specific local revision does not legally strip you of your actual citizenship status. It is a labyrinth of overlapping jurisdictions. So we've just seen how the state defines the legal standing of the individual, but the courts are also actively defining the legal standing of the press, which it takes us right into the Delhi High Court's recent ruling on the NewsClick case.
Yeah, this was a landmark judgment. It was delivered by Justice Neena Bansal Krishna on May 29th, officially released in early June.
And what did the judgment actually do?
The High Court comprehensively quashed the Economic Offenses Wing's initial FIR against the digital news portal, NewsClick, and its editor-in-chief, Prabir Prokayasta. And consequently, they also quashed the Enforcement Directorate's money laundering case.
That's massive.
It is. The language used by the judge was striking, too. She called the continuation of the criminal proceedings nothing but a gross abuse of the process of law.
Wow. I mean, when a high court judge uses the phrase gross abuse, they aren't just disagreeing with the police work, right? They are dismantling the foundational logic of the prosecution.
Oh.
The core allegation was that NewsClick received around, 9.59 crore rupees in foreign direct investment from a U.S. company allegedly tied to Chinese interests.
Why did the court throw this out so definitively?
Well, the court struck it down on three distinct, highly technical legal pillars.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first was the absence of a cognizable offense. The original police FIR charged NewsClick with cheating and criminal breach of trust under the Indian Penal Code. But the mechanics of criminal law require specific elements to be met.
Right.
To prove cheating, you have to actually prove that someone was deceived and fraudulently induced to hand over their property.
Right. If I sell you a car and I take your money but never give you the keys, I've cheated you. You are the victim. So who's the victim here?
That is exactly what the judge asked. The foreign investor who provided the 9.59 crore never filed a complaint. They never claimed they were deceived.
So there's no victim. None. Furthermore, criminal breach of trust involves misappropriating property that was legally entrusted to you. But this was an equity investment, not a charitable trust fund. You literally cannot have a crime of cheating without a cheated party.
So the bedrock of the police report was essentially hollow. But what about the regulatory side? Didn't the authorities claim this investment violated the 26% cap on foreign investment in digital news media?
This brings us to the court's second pillar, the retroactive application of the law. It is a fundamental principle of justice that you cannot be punished today for something that was entirely legal when you did it.
Makes sense.
The 26% FDI cap on digital media was introduced by the government in 2019. NewsClick received this foreign investment in 2018.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, at that time, there was absolutely zero cap on FDI and digital news portals. They had even proactively sought clarification from the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. The court basically noted it is absurd to retroactively criminalize a legitimate business transaction based on a law written a year later.
That makes complete sense. And
Right.
the third pillar.
The third pillar addressed the attempt to criminalize standard business operations. The Enforcement Directorate alleged that NewsClick was siphoning off these foreign funds.
Siphoning them off to where?
Well, when the court actually examined where the money went, it found the funds were being used to pay employee salaries, consulting fees, and office rent.
Wait, paying your staff is the definition of a legitimate business expenditure.
Exactly. A company operating at a financial loss, which NewsClick was, is not evidence of a criminal conspiracy.
Okay, but wait, I need to understand the relationship between the police case and the Enforcement Directorate case. If the police FIR about cheating was thrown out, why does the ED's money laundering case automatically disappear? Can't the ED investigate the foreign money independently?
No, they cannot. And this is the crucial mechanism of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, the PMLA. The ED's jurisdiction is entirely dependent on what is called a predicate offense.
A predicate offense?
Right. Money laundering, legally, is the act of hiding or utilizing the proceeds of crime. There must be an underlying, scheduled, crime-like extortion, fraud, or trafficking that generated the dirty money in the first place.
Ah, I see. It's a chain reaction. If the High Court looks at the underlying police FIR and says, there was no cheating, no crime occurred here, then the money cannot be considered the proceeds of crime.
Precisely.
It's just regular, legally obtained money. And if the money is clean, the ED has no legal authority to investigate it.
Exactly. The predicate offense was quashed, so the PMLA case instantly evaporated. However, this is where the nuance is really vital. Prabir Purkayastha was also arrested under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the UAPA.
Which is India's primary anti-terror law.
Yes. The Delhi Police Special Cell alleged a larger conspiracy to disrupt India's sovereignty. That UAPA case was not quashed by this judgment. It is a completely separate legal track pending in a different court.
And the mechanics of the UAPA are vastly different from standard criminal law, aren't they? Especially when it comes to getting out of jail.
Radically different. Section 43D5 of the UAPA effectively inverts the standard presumption of innocence during the bail process.
How so?
In normal criminal law, bail is the rule, jail is the exception. But under Section 43D5, a judge is legally barred from granting bail if they believe, simply by looking at the police diary, that the accusations are prima facie true.
That's intense.
It is. You essentially have to prove your innocence just to get out of jail to fight your trial. Now, Purkayastha did receive bail from the Supreme Court earlier this year, but that was strictly because his initial arrest procedures were deemed technically invalid by the arresting officers. It wasn't because the court had evaluated the merits of the UAPA terror charges.
I just want to pause again to reiterate, we are objectively reporting the court's legal findings regarding press freedom and financial laws here. We are not endorsing any political viewpoint on the portal or the state's actions.
Absolutely.
So while the financial and corporate allegations have been completely dismantled by the High Court, the overarching terror charges remain a shadow. It's a fascinating look at how the state regulates the flow of capital and information across its borders.
Yeah, it really is.
And regulating capital across borders brings us to a massive contradiction playing out in our physical infrastructure right now. We are fiercely guarding our borders against Chinese investments, but Chinese EV technology is flooding into Indian driveways anyway.
It's a remarkable geopolitical paradox. And to trace the origins of this, we really have to look back to the aftermath of the Galwan Valley clashes in 2020.
Right.
The Ministry of Home Affairs issued a sweeping regulation known as Press Note 3. It mandated that any foreign direct investment from an entity based in a country sharing a land border with India required prior government approval.
And in practice?
In practice, this became a severe, near-total blockade on Chinese companies acquiring equity stakes or ownership in Indian businesses.
The logic was clear, obviously. We don't want a geopolitical rival owning chunks of our strategic industries. So a company like China's BYD, which makes electric vehicles, can't just buy a 30% stake in an Indian automaker.
Correct. When BYD proposed a massive billion-dollar joint venture with India's Mega Engineering, it was effectively blocked.
Right.
However, the global automotive market is undergoing a seismic shift toward electrification. And the undeniable reality is that Chinese EV technology is currently generations ahead of the rest of the world. Indian automakers realize they cannot compete globally or even meet domestic targets without that tech.
So what are they doing?
They have found an ingenious, completely legal workaround, licensing and platform supply agreements without any equity changing hands.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Help me visualize this. What does a non-equity tech transfer actually look like on the factory floor?
Let's look at Tata Motors. They are building a new range of premium electric vehicles in India. But the underlying architecture of those cars, the chassis platform, the battery integration systems, is licensed from China's Chery Automobile.
Oh, I see.
Tata pays Chery a licensing fee or buys the components outright, but Chery gets zero ownership of board seats in Tata Motors.
Yeah.
JSW Motors doing the exact same thing with Chery for their Western India manufacturing plant.
Wow.
We're also seeing joint ventures for components, like Uno Minda partnering with China's Innovents to build EV powertrains locally.
I understand the workaround, but, I mean, it begs a much larger question. Why are Indian companies relying on China for this? We have massive automotive giants. Why can't Tata or Mahindra just build their own battery cells or buy the technology from Japan or Germany?
It comes down to raw, unavoidable mechanics, both in chemistry and manufacturing.
Yeah.
China completely dominates the global supply chain for lithium iron phosphate, or LFP, battery chemistry.
Okay.
Companies like CATL and BYD have optimized their processes to the point where they can produce battery cells at roughly $85 per kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
In contrast, developing that capacity domestically in India currently costs around $140 per kilowatt hour.
That is a staggering price difference. You can't sell an affordable EV in India if your battery costs nearly double what the global standard is.
Exactly. And it's not just the chemistry, it's the manufacturing velocity. Chinese factories utilize massive automation, advanced die casting techniques, sometimes called gigacasting, where the entire underbody of a car is cast as a single piece of aluminum.
Right.
Because of these innovations, a Chinese factory can roll a finished EV off the line in about 18 hours. The current average for Indian automotive manufacturing is over 40 hours per vehicle.
That's less than half the time.
India has launched massive production-linked incentive, or PLI, schemes to build advanced chemistry cells domestically. But we simply do not have the ecosystem mature enough right now to meet those targets without Chinese blueprints. European tech exists, sure, but it's largely focused on different, vastly more expensive chemistries like nickel, manganese, cobalt, and it's expensive to license.
But wait, let's think about what an electric vehicle actually is today. It's not just a chassis and a battery. It's an incredibly complex software architecture.
Absolutely.
Modern EVs are like smartphones on wheels. They have over-the-air updates, continuous telemetry mapping, microphones, and constant internet connectivity. Are we just letting a Trojan horse into our driveways? What about data security? If we are importing the core electronic architecture from China, aren't we essentially integrating a massive data collection network into our infrastructure?
That is the exact nightmare scenario keeping national security officials awake. It is highly reminiscent of the fierce global debate surrounding Huawei and 5G telecom infrastructure a few years ago.
The 5G ban.
If a Chinese-designed EV platform is constantly pinging home to a server to download a software update, could it also be uploading precise GPS logs of Indian military bases, user travel habits, or internal cabin audio?
It's a game of geopolitical Jenga. You pull the block on cheap Chinese tech to protect your data, but if you do, your entire domestic EV manufacturing tower collapses because it's not economically viable.
Precisely. Which is why the Indian government is adopting a highly pragmatic, razor-thin middle ground. As officials noted in the source material, they are willing to bless these licensing deals because they force the physical manufacturing into India.
I see.
The strategy is to utilize Chinese intellectual property to jumpstart our domestic supply chains under the PLI schemes. We want the factories, the jobs, and the hardware built on Indian soil. But by aggressively blocking Chinese equity ownership, India ensures that the corporate governance, the software sovereignty, and ultimately the servers holding the telemetry data remain firmly under Indian legal jurisdiction.
It is a calculated risk. We're using our rivals' blueprints to build the fortress that will eventually compete against them.
Exactly.
So we're talking about regulating capital flowing from geopolitical rivals. But there is another type of foreign capital the state is heavily regulating right now, and this one flows directly into the social sector. This brings us to the new FCRA rules regarding religious conversion.
Right. The Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, or FCRA, is the mandatory gateway for any foreign money entering Indian nonprofits, NGOs, or charitable trusts. It is an incredibly powerful tool of state oversight.
And what changed in June?
In June 2026, the government introduced a highly consequential amendment to the FCRA rules. It now explicitly restricts any registered NGO from utilizing foreign funds for activities that directly or indirectly promote religious conversion.
The phrase directly or indirectly is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting there. How does this interlock with the existing laws on religious conversion in India?
Well, that's where the legal landscape gets incredibly complex. There is no central national level law banning religious conversion. The Indian Penal Code does not prohibit it.
Really?
No. Instead, several individual states like Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Odisha have passed their own strict anti-conversion laws, usually targeting conversions achieved through force, fraud, or allurement. Because there is no national ban, this FCRA amendment is effectively functioning as a national level restriction, but it's achieving this purely through the mechanics of financial regulation rather than a direct criminal statute.
But doesn't this collide directly with the Constitution? I remember reading that the Constitution explicitly guarantees the right to spread your religion.
It does.
Oh.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the core of the constitutional friction here. Article 25 of the Indian Constitution guarantees all persons the freedom of conscience and the right to freely profess, practice, and propagate religion.
Propagate.
Yes. If you read the Constituent Assembly debates, the inclusion of the word propagate was not an accident. It was a specific, fiercely debated concession made by the framers to protect the evangelization rights of minority groups, particularly Christian missionaries.
So if the Constitution grants you the fundamental right to propagate your faith, how can the Home Ministry legally restrict funding for it?
The legal architecture of the state's argument relies on severing the religious act from the economic mechanism. The government argues that they are not violating Article 25 because they are not banning the act of propagation itself. You are completely free to propagate your faith. However, they argue that receiving foreign currency is not a fundamental right. It is a regulated economic privilege. The state claims the authority to dictate what foreign money can be used for in order to maintain public order and social harmony.
I see the legal maneuvering. They aren't policing the religion, they are policing the bank account.
Exactly.
But let's look at how this mechanism actually deploys on the ground for the listener. What happens to the tribal welfare, the schools, and the hospitals run by these foreign-funded NGOs? If an NGO runs a rural hospital, but they have a chapel on the premises and distribute religious literature to patients, does that constitute indirectly promoting conversion?
That ambiguity is exactly what has civil society on edge. The determination of what constitutes indirect promotion will likely fall to local bureaucrats and FCRA enforcement officers.
And if they decide, it does.
If a local official decides that the presence of that chapel violates the new rule, that organization's FCRA registration could be suspended or permanently revoked.
Yeah.
If their foreign funding is frozen, those hospitals and schools could lose their operating budgets overnight, completely disrupting the welfare services they provide to marginalized communities.
Now, I need to emphasize here for our listeners, this is a highly charged political issue, pitting Hindutva politics against minority rights. We are analyzing the legal and constitutional friction points here, entirely neutral to both sides. Our deep dive is focused strictly on the legal mechanisms.
Yes.
So from regulating foreign funds, let's transition to India's reliance on foreign resources, specifically the lifeblood of the economy: oil. We're looking at the return of Iranian oil to the global market and the incredibly puzzling reality that Indian refiners are likely going to ignore it.
The geopolitical context here is the recently negotiated Muscat Accord, which has temporarily eased certain international pressures and allowed a slow resumption of Iran's oil exports. And the economics of it are staggering. Because Iran is still operating under a cloud of international stigma, they are selling their crude at a massive discount. It's currently available at about $65 to $70 a barrel.
Okay, let's unpack this. The global benchmark, Brent crude, is sitting at roughly $88 to $92 a barrel. That means Iranian oil is $20 to $25 cheaper per barrel.
Yes.
India imports massive amounts of oil every single day. If it's $20 cheaper a barrel, why on earth are our refiners leaving that money on the table?
At first glance, it defies economic logic. But when we dive into the physical mechanics of petroleum refining and the architecture of international sanctions, we see three massive, almost insurmountable hurdles. The first hurdle is physical, refinery lock-in.
Wait, so a refinery isn't just a giant boiling pot where you dump any kind of crude oil and petrol comes out the other end?
Absolutely not. Crude oil is not a uniform substance. It varies wildly based on where it is drilled. The two key metrics are API gravity, which measures how dense or heavy the oil is compared to water, and sulfur content, which determines whether the oil is sweet or sour. Iranian crude is generally a heavy, sour crude.
And what have our refineries been processing lately?
Well, before 2019, when the U.S. imposed maximum pressure sanctions, Iran was one of our top suppliers. But for the last 4 years, Iranian oil has been locked out. In that time, giant Indian refining complexes like Reliance's Jamnagar refinery or the massive plants run by BPCL and IOC have spent billions of dollars physically reconfiguring their secondary processing units.
Oh, wow.
They've recalibrated their catalytic crackers and their distillation profiles to optimize for different types of crude. Specifically, they've heavily optimized for Russian Urals, which we've been buying at a massive discount since the Ukraine conflict began, and various Middle Eastern Arab grades.
So it's like an organism that has entirely adapted its digestive system to a new diet. If you suddenly feed it Iranian crude, the machinery literally cannot process it efficiently.
Exactly. The chemical profile is wrong. The sulfur might damage the catalysts currently in the machines. Switching back to Iranian crude isn't flipping a switch. It requires shutting down units, changing out expensive catalysts, and recalibrating the entire thermal process. That costs time and hundreds of millions of dollars.
And a refinery isn't going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to reconfigure their machinery unless they are absolutely guaranteed a long-term, stable supply of that cheap oil. Which brings us to the second hurdle.
The sanctions risk. The Muscat Accord is not a permanent peace treaty. It is a highly fragile, temporary diplomatic window. There is a specific 60-day Phase 2 negotiation deadline that expires on August 13th.
And if they fail?
If those talks fail, and given the volatility of the Middle East that is highly possible, the U.S. could instantly snap its secondary sanctions back into place.
So if an Indian refinery signs a massive 2-year contract with the national Iranian oil company today, and diplomatic talks collapse in August, they are trapped. They have a contract they can't fulfill without triggering U.S. sanctions that could cut them off from the global financial system.
Precisely. The geopolitical risk is currently higher than the economic reward, and that leads directly to the third mechanical hurdle: maritime insurance.
Right. You can't move the oil if you can't insure the ship.
Exactly. Moving millions of barrels of crude oil requires massive supertankers, and those supertankers require complex layers of maritime insurance, primarily provided by Protection and Indemnity, or P&I, clubs, which are heavily concentrated in London and Europe. Even with sanctions temporarily suspended, these insurance syndicates, like Lloyd's of London, are incredibly risk-averse. They have not yet formally cleared long-term Iranian cargo coverage. If a ship spills Iranian oil in the ocean and the insurer refuses to pay because the sanctions status was murky, the financial liability would obliterate the refining company. So until August 13th passes and a permanent legal framework is established, Indian refiners are rationally choosing to leave that cheap oil in the ground.
It's amazing how interconnected it all is. But, while we calculate the global geopolitics of crude oil at home, our power grid is facing a massive seasonal shock straight from the sky. Let's talk about why Grid India is turning to more gas-based power this monsoon.
It is a deeply counterintuitive situation. The assumption is that during the monsoon season, with heavy rains and high winds, our renewable energy sources like hydro and wind power will be operating at maximum capacity, allowing us to turn off fossil fuel plants.
That makes sense.
But the exact opposite is happening with our gas-based power generation.
Why? India has installed over 150 gigawatts of solar capacity. Why are we firing up expensive gas turbines when the sky is full of rain?
The answer lies in the physics of the grid and a phenomenon known as the solar cliff. The electrical grid operates on a razor's edge. Supply and demand must be perfectly balanced every single second to maintain the grid frequency at exactly 50 hertz.
Right.
If supply drops suddenly and demand stays high, the frequency plummets and the entire grid can collapse into a blackout. During the transition from the brutal summer heat waves into the monsoon, massive cloud cover rolls across the subcontinent. When those clouds block the sun, that 150 gigawatts of solar power can crash by 50 to 60% in a matter of 15 to 20 minutes. It creates a colossal, sudden vacuum in power generation.
Okay, but what about hydropower? Shouldn't the dams be overflowing and generating massive amounts of electricity to fill that vacuum?
In theory, yes, but the mechanics of Indian rivers during the monsoon are brutal. The heavy rains wash millions of tons of topsoil and silt into the rivers. This heavily silted water is essentially liquid sandpaper. If you run that abrasive water through the delicate, highly engineered Francis or Pelton turbines inside a hydro dam at high speeds, the silt will cause severe cavitation and physically grind the turbine blades to dust. To protect these multi-million-dollar machines, many hydropower plants are actually forced to reduce their generation or shut down completely during peak monsoon flooding.
So the solar drops off a cliff because of the clouds, and the hydro drops off because the water is too dirty. We need a massive injection of power immediately. Why not just burn more coal? We have massive reserves.
It comes down to thermal inertia. A coal-fired power plant is basically a gigantic kettle. You have to burn coal to heat thousands of gallons of water into high-pressure steam to turn a turbine. If a coal plant is sitting idle, it takes 2 to 3 hours to wake up and reach full capacity.
That's a long time.
They are massive, slow-moving behemoths. You cannot use them to plug a sudden 15-minute hole in the grid. But a combined cycle gas turbine, it operates much like a jet engine. You ignite the natural gas, and it can sprint off the bench to balance the grid in just 10 to 15 minutes. It's a delicate seesaw.
I love that analogy. Coal takes 2-3 hours to wake up, but gas plants can sprint off the bench in 10 minutes. But historically, haven't our gas plants been sitting completely idle because natural gas was too expensive?
They have. India has about 25,000 megawatts of installed gas-based capacity, but for years, it has operated at a dismal 22% plant load factor. It was considered stranded capacity because importing liquefied natural gas, or LNG, was financially crippling compared to burning domestic coal.
What changed?
The geopolitical landscape has shifted. The post-Hormuz diplomatic recovery has stabilized shipping lanes, allowing cheaper Qatari LNG to flow more freely. Spot prices for LNG have plummeted from a high of $18 per MMBTU down to around $12.
At $12, the math finally works.
Exactly. At that price point, generating electricity from these gas plants costs about RSS 4.5 per kilowatt hour. That is cheap enough for Grid India to aggressively deploy these plants as rapid response units to keep the grid from collapsing when the monsoon clouds roll over the solar farms.
It is a stunning web of causality. A drop in natural gas prices in Qatar allows a turbine in Gujarat to spin up in 10 minutes to prevent a blackout in Delhi. But the very same monsoon causing grid headaches is currently failing, threatening the food on the listener's plate. Let's look at the high heat and low rainfall threatening agricultural produce.
The meteorological data is deeply alarming. As of June 25th, the national monsoon rainfall deficit stands at a severe 35% below the long-period average, or LPA.
35%?
Yes. When you combine a severe lack of precipitation with the brutal, persistent heat waves scorching central India, where temperatures have consistently hit 44 to 46 degrees Celsius, you create a scenario of cascading agricultural failure.
I want to understand exactly how this heat and lack of water physically destroys the crops. The outline mentions paddy transplanting in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Odisha is heavily delayed.
Paddy, or rice, requires continuous flooding of the fields, especially during the transplanting phase, to suppress weeds and maintain the specific anaerobic soil conditions the plant thrives in. With a 35% rainfall deficit, farmers who rely on the monsoon simply do not have the water to flood their fields.
So they just wait.
Exactly. If they transplant the seedlings into dry soil, they will wither and die. So millions of farmers are just waiting, staring at the sky, delaying the entire agricultural cycle.
And what about crops that don't need flooded fields? The cotton belt in Vidarbha and Marathwada is suffering immensely, but cotton is relatively drought-tolerant, isn't it?
It is drought-tolerant, but it has severe thermal limits. The biology of the cotton plant breaks down under extreme heat stress. When ambient temperatures exceed 40 degrees Celsius during the critical fruiting phase, the plant's metabolic functions panic.
What does the plant do?
To conserve moisture and survive, the plant aborts its own reproductive cycle. The cotton bolls literally detach and drop off the plant before they can mature into the fluffy fibers we harvest. And with temperatures hitting 46 degrees in Vidarbha, entire fields are shedding their yield.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, the soybean crop in Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra is also facing severe delays. How does that translate to the grocery store?
The impact is massive and immediate. India is fundamentally deficient in edible oils. We consume vastly more than we produce, forcing us to import around 14 million tons of edible oil a year, palm oil, sunflower oil, and soybean oil.
Right.
Domestic soybean production is our primary buffer against global price shocks. If the MP and Maharashtra soybean crops fail due to this delayed sowing, our import dependency skyrockets. Economists are already projecting that this could cause a TARMAGE 10,000 to 15,000 crore spike in our edible oil import bill.
Which translates instantly into higher food inflation for cooking oil. What is the Ministry of Agriculture doing to mitigate this? How do you fight a failing monsoon?
You manage the margins. The ministry is deploying emergency extension services, advising farmers to abandon long-duration crops and switch to short-duration pulses that require less water. They are heavily promoting techniques like the system of rice intensification, or SRI.
I've heard of SRI. How does it actually save water compared to traditional rice farming?
Traditional rice farming relies on continuous flooding. SRI changes the fundamental mechanism. Instead of flooding the field, farmers plant seedlings much further apart and practice alternate wetting and drying of the soil.
Okay, how does that help the plant?
This forces the plant to grow a massive, deep root system to seek out moisture, creating a stronger plant while using up to 40% less water. It requires intensive manual labor to manage the weeds since there's no standing water to drown them, but it is a critical survival tactic during a drought.
So we are deploying new techniques, but ultimately we are desperately hoping for La Niña in August to save the second half of the season.
We are. The entire agricultural sector is currently holding its breath for La Niña conditions to push massive amounts of moisture toward the subcontinent.
Managing this level of compounding chaos, inflation, climate, energy requires intense top-down bureaucratic coordination. How does the executive branch actually govern all this simultaneously? Let's examine the PM's 52nd PRAGATI meeting.
PRAGATI is an acronym for Proactive Governance and Timely Implementation. Launched in 2015 and designed jointly by the Prime Minister's Office and the National Informatics Center, it is arguably the most powerful executive oversight mechanism in the country. It is a multimodal, ICT-based dashboard that fundamentally alters the mechanics of the Indian bureaucracy.
Explain how it bypasses the legendary red tape of the system. What happens to a delayed infrastructure file when it enters the PRAGATI process?
In the traditional bureaucratic model, a delayed highway or power plant file moves horizontally across desks, slowly gathering objections from the Ministry of Environment, the State Land Acquisition Board, and the Finance Department. It takes months to resolve a single bottleneck.
Right.
PRAGATI forces vertical, real-time accountability. During a PRAGATI session, the Prime Minister sits in a room with a massive screen. On that screen are the chief secretaries of the relevant states and the secretaries of the union ministries.
So the person who needs the land cleared is looking directly at the person who hasn't cleared the land, and the PM is watching them both.
Exactly. The psychological pressure of that visibility is immense. If a project is stalled because a state forestry department hasn't issued a clearance, the PM can directly ask the state chief secretary, live on video, why the delay exists, and demand a timeline for resolution right then and there. It collapses months of file pushing into a 10-minute conversation.
And the scale of what they review is staggering. Over 52 meetings, they have monitored more than 340 projects with a combined worth exceeding 17 lakh crore rupees. What specific bottlenecks were they breaking in this latest meeting?
The agenda was a perfect reflection of the crises we just discussed. They were actively monitoring the post-Hormuz economic recovery, ensuring that fertilizer supply chains, which are heavily dependent on imported LNG, were stabilizing. They reviewed delays in urban housing under PMA Urban 2.0, infrastructure rollouts in the Northeast, and critically, they flagged and interrogated persistent delays in the clean gang emissions sewage treatment projects.
It is the ultimate digital whip for the bureaucracy. But India isn't just utilizing technology to break domestic bottlenecks. We are pivoting to our expanding global footprint. Let's look at the BRICS space economy and coal gasification initiatives.
These two initiatives, announced at a recent BRICS side event, represent a profound shift in how the Global South is attempting to build sovereign capabilities. Let's look at the space economy first. India's Department of Space has proposed anchoring a collaborative BRICS space economy framework, with ISRO acting as the primary nodal agency.
What does a BRICS space economy actually look like? Are they building a joint space station?
Not immediately. The initial mechanics are focused on data sovereignty and commercial synergy. Currently, many Global South nations rely heavily on Western commercial satellites for vital Earth observation data needed for agricultural monitoring and disaster management.
Ah, I see.
The BRICS framework aims to pool the satellite resources of India, China, Russia, Brazil, and South Africa. It reduces duplication of effort. If Brazil launches an agricultural monitoring satellite, India can access that data without paying exorbitant fees to a European aerospace firm. It also positions ISRO's highly cost-effective launch vehicles as the primary commercial taxi service for the developing world's satellites.
It's about breaking the monopoly on orbital data. And the second initiative, the coal gasification mission, seems to be about breaking a monopoly on terrestrial resources. The Ministry of Coal announced a target of 100 million metric tons of coal gasification by 2030. Why gasify coal instead of just burning it?
Because burning coal for power is incredibly inefficient and highly polluting. Gasification is a completely different chemical process. Instead of setting the coal on fire, You subject it to intense heat and pressure in an oxygen-starved environment.
Okay.
This process breaks the molecular bonds of the coal and strips away the impurities, converting the solid coal into a synthetic gas known as syngas.
Syngas. And what is syngas made of and why is it so valuable?
Syngas is primarily a mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. And hydrogen is the foundational building block for manufacturing ammonia, which is the core ingredient in urea and other agricultural fertilizers.
Oh, wow. The synergy here is brilliant. We earlier discussed how reliant we are on imported LNG from the Middle East to produce fertilizer. If we can chemically convert our own domestic reserves of coal into the syngas needed to make fertilizer, we sever our dependency on the global natural gas market. We insulate our food supply.
Precisely. It is a masterstroke of economic resilience. It utilizes a domestic resource we have in abundance to replace a foreign resource we bleed foreign exchange to acquire.
Now, while BRICS represents the global south, India is simultaneously finalizing massive trade deals with the West. Let's dive into the final stretch of the UK and US trade talks.
These talks represent the delicate balancing act of Indian diplomacy. Currently, Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is in London, pushing to finalize the implementation frameworks for the India-UK Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CETA, which is targeted to take effect on July 15th.
What are the implementation frameworks they are fighting over?
The devil is entirely in the mechanical details. They are negotiating the exact structure of the joint committee that will govern the free trade agreement. But crucially for India, they are finalizing the operational details of the Double Contribution Convention, or DCC.
Break that down for me. What is double contribution and who does it hurt?
It directly impacts the thousands of Indian IT professionals and skilled workers deployed to the UK on temporary visas. Currently, these workers have to pay Social Security taxes in the UK out of their salaries, but because their visas are temporary, they will never live in the UK long enough to collect those pension benefits.
Right.
At the same time, they are still obligated to contribute to the Indian Provident Fund system back home. They are being taxed twice for a benefit they can only claim once.
That's incredibly unfair.
The convention is a legal mechanism to recognize their Indian contributions and exempt them from the UK's social security tax, saving Indian professionals and their employers millions of pounds annually.
That is a massive tangible benefit. But while things seem to be smoothing out in London, the negotiations in New Delhi with the United States seem vastly more fraught. USTR Jamieson Greer is pushing for an August 15th interim trade agreement. It feels like we are in the 2-minute warning of a tied Super Bowl. Deadlines are looming, and it's all about who blinks first on tech taxes and farm quotas. What are the specific sticking points?
Well, this raises an important question about India's negotiating leverage. The joint statement acknowledged significant progress, noting that the U.S. has offered to extend a 10% base tariff reduction on certain goods. India is showing flexibility on lower tariffs on agricultural products, but the foundational conflicts remain fierce. The U.S. is aggressively demanding the removal of India's equalization levy.
The digital tax. How does that levy actually function?
The equalization levy is essentially a tax on the revenue that foreign e-commerce and digital advertising giants, think Google, Meta, Amazon, generate from Indian consumers. The U.S. government views this as an unfair targeted tariff on American tech supremacy. They want it gone.
And the agriculture side?
The U.S. agricultural lobby is demanding massive market access for American corn and soybeans into India.
And there's the Jenga tower wobbling. If we allow massive imports of cheap, heavily subsidized American soybeans, we directly threaten the livelihood of the millions of Indian farmers in Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra who, as we discussed earlier, are already facing potential ruin because of the delayed monsoon.
Exactly. Everything is interconnected. In exchange for any concessions on tech taxes or agriculture, India is fiercely demanding structural changes to the H-1B visa program. We want a dedicated mobility chapter in the trade agreement that legally guarantees access to the U.S. market for our IT professionals, rather than leaving it to the unpredictable whims of the annual U.S. visa lottery system.
It's a brutal negotiation, but while trade agreements open borders to commerce, we also have to fiercely protect those borders from illicit trade. Let's look at the 10th Apex meeting of NCORD, focusing on the war on narcotics.
NCORD stands for the Narco Coordination Center. It is the highest level mechanism for drug enforcement policy in the country, chaired by Union Home Minister Amit Shah. And at this meeting, it was announced that Indian enforcement agencies seized a record Rs. 21,000 crore worth of narcotics in the 2026 financial year.
21,000 crore rupees. That is an economy unto itself.
It is.
But the truly alarming part of this report isn't just the volume, it's the profound geographical and chemical shift in the nature of the drug trade.
That is the crucial insight. Historically, the primary narcotics threat to India emanated from our western border, specifically the Golden Crescent comprising Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. The primary product was heroin, derived from agriculturally grown opium poppies.
Right.
But geopolitics has disrupted that supply chain. The Taliban's recent crackdowns on poppy cultivation in Afghanistan have caused a massive shock to the traditional heroin supply.
And nature, or rather, the black market, abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. The cartels have ruthlessly adapted by pivoting to synthetic drugs, methamphetamine, fentanyl, and synthetic ketamine. These drugs do not require vast fields of poppies. They only require precursor chemicals in a clandestine laboratory.
And where are they coming from?
Consequently, the primary vector of the drug threat has violently shifted from the western border to the eastern border. We're seeing a massive surge of synthetics pouring in from the Golden Triangle, specifically originating in the lawless regions of Myanmar's Shan state, utilizing the porous borders of India's northeast.
It's an entirely new logistical nightmare for border security. You aren't looking for bales of agricultural product. You are looking for pure, highly concentrated chemical compounds. And the logistics of how these drugs reach the end user have completely mutated as well, haven't they?
They have digitized. A massive portion of the NCORD agenda was dedicated to the rise of the digital cartel. The drug trade is rapidly abandoning the traditional, highly visible street corner dealer. Instead, wholesale distribution is negotiated on the darknet, using Tor browsers to obscure IP addresses. Retail transactions are increasingly moving to encrypted messaging applications like Telegram.
So a buyer can coordinate a drop using end-to-end encryption, pay using anonymized cryptocurrency, and the physical drugs are delivered via local courier services. The enforcement agencies have to crack military-grade encryption software to find the local distributor. It is a terrifying evolution.
It requires a complete modernization of our intelligence apparatus, moving from physical interdiction to deep cyber forensics.
It's a vital, ongoing battle to clean the digital and physical streets of the nation. And that concept of cleaning up the streets transitions us to our final topic today. We connect the idea of cleaning up from drugs to the literal mandate of cleaning up the nation's lifeblood, the rivers. Let's talk about the NMCG Urban River Management Plans.
The National Mission for Clean Ganga, or NMCG, is one of the most ambitious ecological restoration projects in human history. They recently announced the scaling up of their urban river management plans to encompass 63 major cities across the entire Ganga basin.
What does a comprehensive management plan actually entail?
It attacks the pollution vectors holistically. It mandates massive upgrades to the capacity of sewage treatment plants, or STPs, ensuring that raw municipal waste is intercepted before it reaches the water. But it also includes strict solid waste management protocols for the riverbanks to prevent plastic and industrial dumping, and critically, it funds the ecological restoration of the natural floodplains.
Now, we always hear about river cleanups, but is the water actually getting cleaner? Is there empirical data?
Yes. The most critical metric for the health of any aquatic ecosystem is dissolved oxygen, or DO. If the DO level drops below a certain threshold, the river essentially suffocates. Nothing can survive in it.
Why does pollution destroy the oxygen?
It's due to biological oxygen demand, or BOD. When millions of gallons of raw sewage and organic waste are dumped into a river, aerobic bacteria begin to break that waste down. To do that, the bacteria consume massive amounts of the oxygen dissolved in the water. They essentially steal the oxygen from the fish.
Okay.
Back in 2014 and 2015, large stretches of the Ganga had catastrophic DO levels hovering around 3 to 4 milligrams per liter. The river was functionally biologically dead in those zones.
And what are the numbers today?
The continuous monitoring stations along the main stem of the Ganga are now consistently recording dissolved oxygen levels that have rebounded to 7 to 8 milligrams per liter.
That is a staggering recovery. It means the river can actually breathe again.
Exactly. When you double the oxygen availability, the entire food chain resurrects. But the most profound, visible indicator of this ecological victory is the apex predator of the ecosystem, the Gangetic river dolphin.
They are highly sensitive to pollution, aren't they?
Incredibly sensitive. Because they navigate using echolocation, they require a relatively healthy, active ecosystem to hunt. In 2020, their population had dwindled to around 2,800. Today, Wildlife census data confirms their population has rebounded to over 3,500 individuals.
That is genuinely beautiful news. It proves that the degradation isn't permanent, that the biology can heal, although biological oxygen demand is still persistently high in heavy manufacturing hubs like Kanpur, right?
Yes, industrial effluent remains a massive challenge. Industrial heavy metals and toxins are much harder to filter out than organic sewage. But the overarching trajectory of the river's health is undeniably positive.
And that brings us to the end of an incredibly dense stack of updates. I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now. Look at the immense, complex ground we have traversed today. We began by questioning the very foundational legal definition of who you are, how your passport, the document you trust the most, might not actually be the ironclad proof of citizenship you thought it was.
We examined the literal power keeping the lights on in your home, and how a gas grid in India relies entirely on the fluctuating price of LNG from Qatar.
We saw how that same failing monsoon, combined with brutal heat, alters the biology of a soybean plant, directly threatening the price of the cooking oil on your kitchen counter. We saw how the battery in your electric vehicle is tied to a complex geopolitical dance of technology licensing with China.
And how the state is utilizing the FCRA to regulate the capital flowing into the social fabric of the nation.
The absolute interconnectedness of the modern state is the core takeaway here. A trade negotiation in London, a hidden synthetic drug laboratory in Myanmar, an insurance syndicate refusing to cover Iranian oil. They are not isolated events. The mechanics of global governance eventually arrive right at your doorstep. They dictate the rules of your life.
They absolutely do.
And that leaves me with a final, lingering thought for you to mull over. Today, we've seen how deeply interconnected the local is with the global. In a world where your paper passport might not legally prove your citizenship, but the battery in your EV could theoretically broadcast your exact location to a foreign nation, how do we even define sovereignty in the 21st century? Think about that the next time you plug in your car or read the news. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today.
See you next time.